Recently, someone asked about how I went from documenting my experiences as an American abroad to politics. It's because I'm documenting my existence. No matter where you live or if you choose to, life is political. Human existence is inherently political. Living in a body like mine, it's impossible not to understand that. My presence makes a statement. An American married to an immigrant is a statement. An American immigrant is a statement. With each video, I will continue to document my experiences through the lens of an American living in Spain. The thing is, living abroad shines a light on certain aspects of life in the US. Did you know that Spain rewrote its constitution multiple times? Most significantly, the 1978 Constitution. It established democracy after the Franco dictatorship. It was written very quickly and in secrecy. It makes me wonder if the US could be so bold as to write a new constitution. The US is at the end of an era that has been in conflict with its stated values and reality, an era where liberty, justice, and equality have never been realized, an era where slavery, sharecropping, Jim Crow, the Southern strategy, and the rolling back of civil rights are allowed to flourish, an era where the punishment for human bondage was replaced with a system of rewards, an era where 40 acres and a mule would have unchained their descendants from the stain of slavery. Reparations are not a zero-sum game. They're an investment in a healthier society, a society that acknowledges past crimes to build a thriving future. A future where all people can flourish without the weight of historical denial. The cost of inaction is a nation perpetually at war with itself. So, right now, it's clear that the US is at war with itself because we allowed the Confederacy to win. A Confederacy where labor is disposable, a Confederacy where power and wealth is concentrated in the hands of few. So, to repair the injustices of this bygone era, we need a new constitution. We need reparations. It can be done through policy reforms, financial compensation, and acts of accountability. It would serve as an amends for slavery, an amends for the decimation of indigents, and for Jim Crow segregation and redlining. But wait, there's more: mass incarceration and ongoing discrimination for the grapes, the herders, the cannibalism, the torture, the indignity. You see, restitution is not a handout, it's a restoration of things stolen: wealth, opportunity, and prosperity. Think of investments in education, healthcare, and housing. Then sprinkle on some legal and institutional reforms to dismantle a system baked in Confederacy. This would transform the lives of many Americans. It would address intergenerational trauma and inequity. Had America kept its promise to itself, communities would have escaped cycles of poverty, marginalization. This would have diminished the resentment and mistrust that fuel the polarization we see today. It would have empowered communities. They could have built generational wealth through home ownership, education, and entrepreneurship. It could have funded clinics and environmental justice initiatives. This would have reversed disparities in life expectancy, maternal mortality, and chronic illness. Formal acknowledgement of harms would uphold the US and its values. It would validate Americans' experiences. It reduced the social trauma and foster trust in institutions. In 1865, the US government briefly granted reparations to white enslavers. Enslavers were paid up to $300 per slave person freed. Meanwhile, freed families were promised 40 acres and a mule, a promise that was reversed. The land was returned to the nation's traders. This hypocrisy, compensating oppressors while denying victims, this hypocrisy laid the foundation for today's wealth gap. It provided footing for the separation within the lower class. It entrenched the belief that people are disposable. Reparations are not about punishing white people today for slavery. They target systemic harm, not individual guilt. Additionally, the US has paid reparations before. It was the compensation to Japanese Americans interned during World War II. This is proof that we can do it. The absence of reparations has allowed unaddressed guilt among Americans to morph. It turns into defensiveness, denial, and resentment. This fuels polarization, as seen in the backlash to race based movements and ideas. Restitution could reframe guilt as responsibility. By acknowledging harm through concrete action, we can replace shame with collective accountability. Responsibility could foster empathy. Shared investment in justice could build bridges across social and racial lines. Think things like funding schools or healthcare. Atonement, it could disarm Christian nationalism. Addressing root causes of inequity undermines narratives of racial hierarchy. Some credit Germany's Holocaust reparations to Jewish survivors with fostering national reconciliation. America is a nation which needs to reconcile. The failure to provide reparations exacerbates colorism within communities. Systemic neglect forces competition for scarce resources. And then proximity to whiteness becomes a survival tool. It becomes proximity to wealth. And that leads us, those who aren't ultra wealthy, fighting one another based on race. It leads to color based hierarchies. This unresolved debt also exacts a toll on Americans. The US perpetuates systemic inequality, psychological division, and societal stagnation. They do this by evading accountability for centuries of exploitation. These are burdens that undermine the collective well being of all citizens. Unaddressed historical crimes breed cognitive dissonance. How can a nation founded on liberty and justice for all ignore its foundational sin? It often manifests as defensiveness, rejecting discussions of racism, opposing policies like affirmative action, or dismissing reparations as divisive. These reactions stem from unspoken anxiety about complicity in an unjust system. Meanwhile, it fosters a culture that rationalizes privilege rather than question it. The result is a society fractured by distrust, where progress on shared goals like healthcare or climate action gets sabotaged by radical politics. The lack of accountability sustains systems that focus on the wealthy. It even harms even those they apparently privilege. Political elites exploit racial resentment to divide the working class Americans. They redirect anger over economic inequality into scapegoating marginalized groups. Rhetoric about welfare queens and crime ridden cities distract us. They distract us from tax policies that benefit the ultra wealthy, and this manipulation fractures solidarity. It ensures that poor and middle class Americans remain disempowered. Similarly, the myth of racial hierarchy stifles cultural and intellectual progress. A society organized around exclusion cannot harness the full potential of its people, whether in arts, science, or governance. Reparations are not a zero sum punishment. There is benefit to investing in society. Stimulate the economy by closing the wealth gap. It will unlock trillions in GDP growth. Ease psychological burdens. It'll replace guilt with collective responsibility. Disarm white supremacy by dismantling the myth of racial hierarchy. Restore global credibility by modeling accountability. The cost of inaction is not just unpaid debt, it's a nation perpetually at war with itself. Reparations offer a path to transform that war into renewal. It'll prove that justice for some is justice for all. Reparations are not a radical idea, it's a practical solution to America's oldest injustice. Had the US provided reparations as it promised, it could have prevented generations of poverty. It could have dismantled systemic inequities. It could have preempted the toxic polarization that defines our modern politics. Reparations offer a path to national healing by addressing guilt through accountability rather than denial, by uniting communities through shared uplift. The cost of inaction is measured not only in dollars, but in the soul of a nation. This nation is still divided by the legacy of its original sin. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced.